Hi, I'm Grant.
And I'm Paddy. And together we run the Visual Jam.
It all started last summer with our very first guest, the sketchnoting legend, Mike Rohde.
And now Mike is joining us once again to launch an exciting new initiative. Hold on, where's he gone?
Don't know, mate. He was here a minute ago. He's probably busy doing a mixtape of his favourite 80s new wave tracks.
Mike, get in here. We're doing the announcement.
Oh, hi guys. Are we doing it now?
Yes, we're doing it now.
We are super excited to announce the Visual Jam Xtra with our special guest, Mike Rohde. Mike is going to deconstruct his sketchnoting process for us. We are going to get inside his brain and understand how he ticks.
I'm getting inside Mike's brain. It's awesome in here.
What can you see?
I can see some classic 80s films.
Ooh, I love Back to the Future. And planes, trains and automobiles. What else?
To be fair, there's quite a bit of junk. Gourmet coffee, curry dishes, old Mac power books. Hold on. I can see some stuff about pens and notepads, so we must be getting close.
Oh yeah, here's the good stuff. All of Mike's sketchnoting knowledge. It's amazing.
Oh, that hurts a little bit.
Okay, Paddy, I guess we'd better stop.
Okay, but if you want to delve even deeper into the amazing sketchnoting mind of Mike Rohde, then why not join us on Saturday, April the 24th for the Visual Jam Xtra.
Thanks so much for having me, guys. It's been really fun to work with you. And to have everyone here, it's been just a really fun time to be part of this whole endeavor. So thank you everyone for coming. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I've been excited for a couple of weeks as this has been building up over time to do this with you. And it should be a lot. I just think it'll be a lot of fun. So I'm going to get right into it. First thing I'll do is I'll tell you what I'm going to do in general, and then we'll get into it. So the first thing we're going to do is I want to show you how I set up my sketchnotes. I think that could be really valuable to see how I approach setting them up, the kind of things that I do before I sit in an auditorium, well, whenever I get to sit in an auditorium again, and capture a sketchnote. And this can apply to live sketchnotes online or recorded stuff. I really like this idea of preparing as much as possible so that I can focus in the moment. So anything I can take away from having to worry about while I'm working is a plus. So the way I'm going to approach this is I'm going to do what I would call a slow motion sketchnote, if that makes sense. So I'm going to play the audio from the 2005 Steve Jobs commencement address. It's a really excellent talk. We considered doing other talks, and then when I listened to it again, I was just reminded how amazing this talk is. The other reason I like this talk is it's really great for beginners, so if you're a beginner on the call, and it's also great for advanced people. Like every time I do it, I find some new nugget. But what I like about Steve is he's very clear in his language. You can tell he worked very hard to tighten up this talk to under 15 minutes. He uses very visual language, the way he describes things. And for beginning sketchnoters, it's really valuable to have someone speaking in these word pictures because it makes it so much easier for you as a sketchnoter getting started to see these things in your head and then be able to draw this on the page. And what I'm going to be doing is I'll be playing the audio. There's really no reason to show the video because all it is Steve standing in a lectern. Really nothing much to look at there. No slides, none of that stuff. So audio is just fine. And this can be a tip for you if you want to practice sketchnoting. Sometimes using audio like podcasts or speeches, not looking at the video could be an advantage. Could be a way that you could do your work without the distraction of worrying about what's happening so your eyes can focus on the page. And what I'll do is as I get to certain points, I'll pause the audio and I'll tell you why I did something or what I'm doing or what I'm thinking or maybe what I'm planning to do next. And then I'll start the audio again and we'll work our way through. So we'll take a 15-minute talk that Steve presents and we'll stretch it out to about an hour and a half, something like that, with all the pausing and explanation. I really find this idea of seeing someone working and explaining what they're doing really valuable. I've been seeing this more and more, and that's inspired me to do the same thing. So I invite you, it looks like lots of people have paper and pens, their favorite things. I invite you to follow along as we work, that you can build a sketchnote too. If you just want to replicate whatever I'm doing, that's just fine. I'm a big believer in replicating or copying what someone else does to see how it feels, and then you can start to own it and do it yourself. So let's get started. I'm going to switch over to my desk camera, and then you'll see my book, and we'll talk a little bit about tools and get right into it. Good. So this is I've got a camera pointed at my desk, and you can see what I have with me today is a Sketchnote idea book. And I really love this book. Obviously, I'm a little biased because I made it with Mike Shiano, but in practice, I found this book to be really excellent. So we have we're going to use that today, and we have a code for you guys, a special code that we're going to share with you so that you can pick them up if you don't have one. So you'll see a couple of tools. I'm really simple. So the first one I'm using today is Sharpie now has these gel pens. This is a 1.0. I really like thick pens when I sketchnote. That's just my preference. I know like Eva Lotta Lamb really loves like the thinner the better. If she could get 0.0.1, she would be in love, right? So I'm the opposite direction. I love a real thick black pen. So I found this Sharpie pen that works really well for that. The next one that you'll see is I wanted one color. So you'll see my tools are pretty simple. This is the new Neuland Fine One Sketch. You notice it has sort of a funky tip. And that's so it keeps it from rolling on the table. It'll stop. And this is in a teal color. And just as a little tip, these are refillable, and I think the tips are even replaceable. So you could basically run the same pen for the rest of your life if you wanted to. So that's going to be a fine tip. That's a 0.5. So that's about roughly half the thickness of the black. And then the last tool I'll use, and this for you could be a highlighter marker, almost doesn't matter. I've just chosen a gray Neuland Fine One Art. And so this is a brush tip, and it can flex from very fine to very thick. This is great mainly for shadowing. So if you want to drop shadows on things really quickly, it just has I really like the use of a brush pen, because sometimes you want a really fine, tiny little brush, and other times you want to cover more area, like you can turn it on its side and cover area. So this is really helpful to have a brush to do that. So those are really the three drawing tools. And then the last thing you'll see is just an index card. I have, these are Baron Fig index cards. I like them because they have rounded edges. They just feel good. And they have a dot grid on the back. So I just happen to have these, but I'll show you what I'll use those for in a minute. So those are tools. So now the other thing that I wanted to talk about was preparing your sketchnote. Now it looks like I had printed out Steve Jobs, and I don't have his picture, so I'm going to draw him from memory. Now, but what I want you to talk to you about is a lot of times it can be really helpful before you begin sketchnoting to build the title before you begin. And I have a story, both a tip and a cautionary tale around the story. I did a sketchnote gig in Atlanta for a big conference, and I spent the night before preparing these title pages that we're going to do in a minute, and spelled everybody's name right and had like enough pages for everyone. And I went to the conference and did the sketchnoting, and the CEO of Coke at the time, I don't know if he's still the CEO, had a bit of an unusual name. I spelled it right on the title page, but throughout the sketchnote I spelled it wrong, and so I had to modify it. So at least in the title you can make sure that they're properly spelled. So what I'm going to do is I've seen the Steve Jobs event enough, so I'm going to just draw Steve from memory. But what I'll say is this is your smartphone is your friend. So if you're at a conference and you look someone up, you can find a picture of them, and you can use that as a reference, so you don't have to try and imagine like I'm doing. Now I have the advantage that I've seen Steve's talk enough that I can draw him from memory. And it's probably a stylized drawing of Steve. So he's got his little goatee there. Now at this point in Steve's career, he was kind of balding. So he did not have a lot of hair up top. He had just a little bit on the side, so we'll do that. And I'm going to channel Ben Felius and Nadine Rosa, and they talked about this Berlin style that I'm going to play with a little bit on Steve, and that is you sort of do the drawing and then you put a thick border around the edge. I really like that. Almost looks like a woodcut or something like that. So we'll just do that as a stylistic choice. Now, the last thing I'll note about Steve is he is dressed in the cap and, not the cap and gown, but the gown, I suppose, whatever that. There's probably a technical name for that. I don't know. And so I'll draw his shoulders like so. And then it's got the sash. I guess it's a sash of some kind coming across. Now, the robe that he's wearing, I think it was maroon. I don't have that color. So I think what I'll do is I'll leave this alone. We'll let it dry up a little bit. I'll come back and hit it with the gray tone and maybe some of the green as a way to highlight it. Put some more details in. So there we go. There's Steve. Really simple drawing. And now what I think I'll do is I'm going to do some larger lettering that's going to represent Steve's name and then the speech itself so we can get ourselves ready. So what I think I'll do now is start with, I think I'm going to do 2-line lettering, which if you've seen me, I've done before. So you'll notice I do like 2 lines like this and then I fill it in. So what happens is the first line, I'm doing quickly, the first line becomes the guide for the second line, like this. And I think I'm going to have a little fun with this too. So the other thing I love to do with my lettering is what I call ligatures. And so you notice that the T here leaves me a little space. Why not put the little E down in here, just like this? Then I'll come back up with the V. Now, what I would recommend is, I've done this a lot, so I'm sort of eyeballing the baseline for the lettering, and I'm guessing. I don't care if it's uneven. I'm not worried about that. But what you might want to do is a fourth tool you might want is a little pencil, just to draw a line, maybe even with a straight edge, so that you have a nice baseline. As you practice this kind of lettering, you can get better at figuring out where that baseline should be. But there are times too when if I'm doing illustration or something important, I will definitely drop a baseline in pencil on that paper. So now we're on the J. I think I'll put a little notch on the J here just for fun. I'll make a big O. So you notice I'm not worried about like imperfect lines inside because eventually I know that I'll be filling it in. So that's the big advantage of the 2-line method, however you practice it, is I'll show you what I mean. So let's say I want to build the B. Like, I don't care if it crosses over and I have this, this structure. I'll build the second B here. Like, this doesn't really matter to me because eventually it's just going to get filled in. So it's really a benefit for me as I do that kind of lettering. Now, the last thing I'll do when I get to the last S in Steve Jobs is I'll kind of look at the whole unit and see, are there places where it could be equalized? Are there places that are thin? Is there a place too thick that I have to adjust everything to? It looks pretty good. It seems like because I focused a lot on the B, it seems a little bit darker than the others. So as an example, this J seems a little wimpy. So I'll come back in and just add a little bit of another line, just some beefiness to that J. I'll look for a few spots. I really like these little marks in the letter form, so I leave them in there. I think it sort of gives it a human feel. The E is pretty good. I want to put just a little more weight on there. I think I'll put it on the back side. So you see, all I did was this tiny little line, but it's effective in giving it a little depth. And I'm on that E, see that right here? I'm just going to leave that little mark there. The V is a little weird. So I'm going to try my best to straighten it out. And again, if these are imperfect, it doesn't matter. You're a human being. You're not a machine. If I wanted it perfect, I would typeset it and stick it on the page. But that's not my intention. So you'll see I'm just working all these. The T could be a little bit thicker up top. So the other thing you'll see, now look at the space between the E and the V. I like this. I would say if I went back again, maybe I would have made more space here between the E and the V. So I have a little space here. I'm going to put some thickness on the back side of the T so it visually starts to feel equalized. Now, I know it's not, if you measured it, wouldn't be equalized. But the other thing I'll tell you is from being a designer for a long time, in all of this work, just because it measures as the same doesn't mean it looks the same. So there is definitely truth to this idea of visual centering, visual balance, those kind of things. And trust your eyes before your ruler. If it looks wrong and it measures right, it's still wrong because everyone's going to see it the wrong way. All right, so we've got
Mike.
yeah,
sorry to jump in. I've seen a few people on the chat say that the frame rate's a little bit slow.
Is it?
I don't know if that's something you can help with.
Let me see what I can do.
Your flow either. So
let me see what I can do. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually reduce the screen size on the video of the desk. It'll say keep the same proportions, but maybe it's a little bit less video that it's got to pump through Zoom. So keep an eye on that. Please let me know if it's still a little herky-jerky, and we'll see what we can do to correct it. So let's see if that sizing of things a little bit will help. Okay, so we've got Steve's drawing. We've got his name. Now I'd like to put some text down for what the talk is that he's part of. And this is Stanford Commencement Address. And here I'd like to do script. So I'll show you what my script would look like. I would actually start it here. So I've got Stanford. Commencement. And what I might do is some faux script here. So I'll put a little bit of thickness on certain strokes to make it look almost like it was done with a calligraphy pen or a brush or something. So it's typically on the vertical stroke that I like to do it. How's the frame rate holding up, Paddy and crew? Anybody want to report in on that?
Yeah, it's still the same, I think, Mike. But it's for me, it's pretty good because it's almost like slow motion. So, but
interesting.
I don't know how it is.
My guess is that maybe we're pushing Zoom to its limits.
Yeah, and maybe just to mention to everyone, Mike's also recording this locally. So when we release the video, you'll get a much higher definition video of the actual sketching.
I apologize for that. Maybe if I go slower, it won't feel so delayed.
I think we can roughly follow it. Is the feedback we're getting, Mike? So I think it's workable, but like Paddy says, we'll send out the higher res.
I'm going to try one more thing. I'm going to reduce it again by probably another 40% in size. So I think the challenge is Zoom is literally sending the pixels that it sees in this clip, right?
Yeah.
So if it's too many pixels, it struggles. So by reducing the pixels it needs to send, we may actually solve the problem, maybe.
A few people have mentioned about turning off video cameras. That's fine, guys. If you want to give that a go and see if it has an effect.
Turn off your outbound video. That can sometimes help. We've got lots of different machines out there that are struggling to process. So let's see how that does. We've reduced it by probably about half here. Okay. So I want the word address in here. I think I might actually come back in with regular lettering and do address in my 2-line. And I'll do this a little more quickly so you can see what 2-line lettering looks like. And I have to be careful not to talk too much while I'm writing because I have a tendency to do typos when I'm trying to do two things at once. Like Zoom, my processor runs out of capacity at some point. And this was 2005. There we go. All right. So I think what I'll do is I'll stop now and I'll do a little, we'll go in and I'll do some highlighting and some playing around with color. to show you how that would work. So I think what I want to do is, I know he's wearing a gown. I don't know, with a thin line like this, I don't know that I want to fill it. I actually want to do crosshatch. So I'll do really close together green crosshatch lines. Well, not crosshatch, but just lines. And you'll notice that I'm trying to match one of the angles of the sash. So when I get to the sash, then it's lining up a little bit. And you'll see I'm just sort of roughly trying to do this like a shape. So now I'll come in with the gray marker, and let's do a little bit of tonality. So I think what I would do is, I'm going to say the light is coming from this direction. And that would mean a little bit of shade on this side of his head, on his nose, on his mouth, on the sash, just like that. And then what I think I might actually do also is, I like sort of having like a bubble of gray around him. So I'll just do a shape like this. You notice that I started away from the ink. My concern is, even though this is, the ink is hopefully dry, that I want to come into the ink. So if it does pick up the ink, it wouldn't spread it outward. So by coming into it, I start with a nice light gray and come in, work my way in, and just barely touch that ink on the inside. So it's just more of an approach toward the ink. I think this ink is pretty good at not picking up, but the other thing to notice is that even these grays, like as you lay them on, they become darker. So what I can do is sort of even that out a little bit. All right. I think that's pretty good. I don't want to overdo it. Okay. So I think I'm pretty good shape for this. Now what I'm going to do is stop for a second, and I'll show you a trick that I'll sometimes do is, if I know that a talk is a certain length of time, I'll do a little plan. So you notice I've got my little 3x5 card, so I don't have to mess with the page here. And I can make scrap of it. So what I'll do is I'll draw, and you can just use a scrap of paper or another page, or you can just watch. I'll draw a representation of this A5 book, right? And the idea here is to figure out how much room I'll need on the page to capture this information. So I guess if you go into an event, you're going to have a good sense of how long that event is, and you can sort of estimate on your page. And this is a nice little thumbnail technique. So what I think is, this Steve sketch is, maybe it's a little bit more like this. It's about this much. So I'll just represent, here's my Steve, right? Then I think, I know that he's got about 15 minutes. So I think what I'll do is I will say, I'm going to give a little bit, maybe a little bit more for the first point, because there might be something in the intro. But it's not so far off to suggest that the other 5 minutes, I'm going to guess that he's going to do it in 3 parts. Now I know he does, but you could do it this way. You sort of plan your space this way. So my goal is to fill this page. Now this, of course, can flex up and down. So it may turn out that one is a little bit less, and I'll end up with a little white space, and that these might be tighter, possibly. So I'll have to make some decisions in the moment how I want to flow this. I actually don't know how it's going to work, which is half the fun of doing this, and seeing how things flow. So far, I like where I'm at. Probably the thing that is interesting here is I have a dead space here that I'm in the back of my mind. I'm thinking about what could I put in this space. So maybe I'll do a little sketch, right? And say, maybe there's something. Maybe this is, so Stanford, actually their logo is a tree. So maybe there's the Stanford tree I could put there, right? I can start thinking about, with this little sketch card, like what could I put there? And then I can put that aside. So it's kind of nice to have a little scratch pad with you, a little card or something. You can test your pens on it, right? You can see, like if I do that color and I lay some gray on it, like how will it react? It seems fine. And to make sure that your pens work okay. So now we'll move this off And I think it's about time to get started. We'll come back to this, and if I have a great idea for this, maybe it's the Stanford tree, we'll come back and we'll do that. And what I'll do is the way I position my pens is I'll have one here, and then off screen, you can't see it, but they're right above me, are the two tonal things. Now, I typically will do black first and come back and do the color and the tone as a secondary pass. So that's the way I'll do it today. Again, anything that I can take away that will keep me from being distracted, I want to do. So I think now what I'll do is I'll get started. And this is audio of Steve Jobs' commencement address that I'll be playing, and I will be pausing it from time to time to talk about what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing and what I'm thinking about. So this will take a little bit longer than the 15-minute talk, but that's really, the goal of what we want to do. So, all right, here we go.
I'm honored to be with you today for your commencement from one of the finest universities in the world. Truth be told, I never graduated from college, and this is the closest I've ever gotten to a college graduation. Today, I want to tell you 3 stories from my life.
So I'm going to stop for a second right away. So it's interesting, 2 things I notice here. The audience are all graduates of this very expensive, fine university. And what does he admit from the outset? I never attended or graduated college, and this is the closest I've gotten, right? So he's coming in and he's offering some humility. And Steve Jobs is not necessarily known for his humility. So it's a really interesting dynamic that he's setting up here, whether it's, believed or not believed. But the other thing he said were he has 3 stories. So coming back to this, it turns out that my structure, if I broke it into 3 parts, works pretty well. So this can be point 1, point 2, point 3, something like that. So the thing I'll tell you is don't always believe this. Some speakers will say they have 3 points and then they sneak a 4th one in there, and then you're stuck. So giving yourself some flexibility can be helpful. And sometimes you just can't do anything about it. It's just what it is. Like they'll sneak it in at the last minute. So you have to make a decision whether you want to put it in. But that's something to be aware of. Okay. So now the other thing I'll say is if I'm in this moment and I hear I have 3 stories, I would probably take the risk and say, I want to put, I'm going to have some kind of numbering on here. And so what I'll do is I'm going to say in the left column, I'm going to do a linear sketch note. I'm going to start with the number 1. I think what I want to do is this feels sort of organic. I don't want to go with a square. I think what I might actually do is start with the number, and I would do it in the same style as the heading up above. And then I'm thinking, do I want to, maybe when I come back, the shape I can deal with later. Maybe it'll be a circle, more of an organic circle, and then maybe some gray on the edge or something. But let's just start with 1. I'll leave it I'll leave it for later. So this is a useful tip for you, is you don't have to do everything in the moment. So if I have a feeling like I want to come back and tie some things together, all I really need is the bare minimum. And this can come in handy. We talked about this on Instagram tips, that if you don't know what to draw there, just leave it blank and figure it out later. You can come back to it. So here we go again. So first tip.
That's it. No big deal. Just 3 stories. The first story is about connecting the dots. I dropped out of Reed College after the first 6 months, but then stayed around as a drop-in for another 18 months or so before I really quit. So why did I drop out? It started before I was born. My biological mother was a young, unwed graduate student, and she decided to put me up for adoption. She felt very strongly that I should be adopted by college graduates, so everything was all set for me to be adopted at birth by a lawyer and his wife. Except that when I popped out, they decided at the last minute that they really wanted a girl. So my parents, who were on a waiting list, got a call in the middle of the night asking, "We've got an unexpected baby boy. Do you want him?" They said, "Of course." My biological mother found out later that my mother had never graduated from college and that my father had never graduated from high school. She refused to sign the final adoption papers, She only relented a few months later when my parents promised that I would go to college. This was the start in my life. And 17 years later, I did go to college. But I naively chose a college that was almost as expensive as Stanford. And all of my working class parents' savings were being spent on my college tuition. After 6 months, I couldn't see the value in it. I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life and no idea how college was going to help me figure it out. And here I was, spending all the money my parents had saved their entire life. So I decided to drop out and trust that it would all work out okay. It was pretty scary at the time, but looking back, it was one of the best decisions I ever made. The minute I dropped out, I could stop taking the required classes that didn't interest me and begin dropping in on the ones that looked far more interesting.
So this is interesting. He's repeating the dropout. So he started with it once, and he's come back to it. He's talked a little bit about this unexpected baby boy, and he'll go to college would be my interpretation of his mom saying that, you know, he's got the little mortarboard on top of his head, little baby with a mortarboard, right? So you'll notice something else, like he started moving quickly. If I was doing this live, you'll notice I stopped here. So actually what I would be completing later would be connecting the dots in the same style. So I'll finish the word here, but I'll come back to it. Maybe I would do script again. I've got script running as my counter. We'll just finish it up while we're here. I think what I can probably do is come back in and darken this and do some coloring at the end. All right, let's go and listen to what he talks about when he talks about dropping in.
It wasn't all romantic. I didn't have a dorm room, so I slept on the floor in friends' rooms. I returned Coke bottles for the 5-cent deposits to buy food with. And I would walk the 7 miles across town every Sunday night to get one good meal a week at the Hare Krishna temple. I loved it. And much of what I stumbled into by following my curiosity and intuition turned out to be priceless later on. Let me give you one example. Reed College at that time offered perhaps the best calligraphy instruction in the country. Throughout the campus, every poster, every label on every drawer was beautifully hand calligraphed. Because I had dropped out and didn't have to take the normal classes, I decided to take a calligraphy class to learn how to do this. I learned about serif and sans serif typefaces, about varying the amount of space between different letter combinations, about what makes great typography great. It was beautiful, historical, artistically subtle in a way that science can't capture, and I found it fascinating. None of this had even a hope of any practical application in my life. But 10 years later, when we were designing the first Macintosh computer, it all came back to me. And we designed it all into the Mac. It was the first computer with beautiful typography. If I had never dropped in on that single course in college, the Mac would have never had multiple typefaces or proportionally spaced fonts. And since Windows just copied the Mac, it's likely that no personal computer would have them.
So that's a good breaking point that we'll talk about. So you'll see what I'm starting to do. We finished the connecting the dots. The theme here is sort of dropping out. And then he goes right to this baby story. I've got mom giving him up and promising to go to college. You'll see I'm using this sort of this arrow, this simple arrow, where he says, and I did, but then I dropped out. So my sense is that maybe I'll put a little Steve down here, right? That I would fill this in, and then maybe I would finish it with a mom here. I don't know what his mom looks like. So this becomes almost like a chunk of his mom and then him, sort of this counter thing. And then now we've got this, the little Mac. So I'll draw the keyboard that's popping up over here. You see a little calligraphy on here and a little mouse in a small space. So, all right. So I think we're doing pretty good. I'm going to leave this space for later, and then we'll continue down here.
If I had never dropped out, I would have never dropped in on that calligraphy class, and personal computers might not have the wonderful typography that they do. Of course, it was impossible to connect the dots looking forward when I was in college, but it was very, very clear looking backwards 10 years later. Again, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. You have to trust in something. Your gut, destiny, life, karma, whatever.
All right. So the thing that I'm hearing is sort of a reflection here of drop out, drop in. There's sort of a contrast that he's setting up when I listen to it. And he's talking about this combination of dropping out and connecting the dots. So dropping out sort of took him out of the pressure that he was feeling. To suddenly, he talks about going to the Hare Krishna temple and Coke bottles and stuff like that. So I think while I'm here, I'll do his mom. Maybe she had glasses. Do a little something like that. So the other thing I like is sort of this integration where things are starting to move. Even though I'm doing a linear sketch note, I'm kind of playing with space a little bit intentionally so that we can play with it and enjoy the space, even though we're going down the page. All right, here we go again.
Because believing that the dots will connect down the road will give you the confidence to follow your heart, even when it leads you off the well-worn path. And that will make all the difference.
All right, so that was point number one. So I've got a fair amount of space here. I've got a decision to make. You'll notice I did something where I had this idea of connecting the dots, looking backwards. So I've got the arrow coming back. So we kind of go backwards. We'll come back and fill this in. So his mom looks a little bit strange, but we can maybe work that. She's got a very big hand here. And these things happen sometimes in, when you're doing it live. It's just a matter of, I always feel like one thing I'll tell you is sometimes when things go wrong, they actually provide me the opportunity to do something that I wouldn't have expected. So like, even though his mom looks a little bit strange here, like I see it as maybe there's an opportunity to play with this and have some fun. All right. So let's do a little.
Mike.
Yes, sir.
Did you mean to do drop in at the bottom left?
Oh yeah, look at that. You're right. I was reading that and talking. See what happens when I talk? So I think what I might do is actually, now that you've mentioned that, we'll reflect this.
Yeah, just show the contrast.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, cool.
Thanks for the catch. That's something too that when you come back through, you start to see issues and you can hopefully correct them. So I'm doing all this in black. We can come in and do some things to help tie things together with color as well. So I'm trying to imagine a young 1970s Steve Jobs. I think if I remember, he sort of had, like John Lennon glasses, and I think he had like a beard or something, like a longer beard. So we'll take a minute and draw that. So the advantage of this would be something I wouldn't necessarily do in the moment unless somebody is rambling. And I know Steve is not a rambler. So there wouldn't be much time in reality to do this. This would be a kind of a thing I would do after the fact. I would sort of lay the words down that I wanted and then leave space and probably come in and reflect on what he said and write some things. So we'll do that as well. So I think what I'm going to do here is I'm going to stop and leave this the way it is. We're going to go to point 2. How are we doing for our first hour, guys? How close are we to our break so I can manage my time?
We're on track. We're slightly ahead of what we said
Okay.
Like, we were aiming to be about where we are now in about 5 minutes time, so you did doing well.
Okay. All right. Good. 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 All right. I'm so focused on doing this, I'm not as focused on the time that I'm spending. I'll move this up a little bit. I can see that on the camera it's doing that. So I think what I would do is, again, I'll come back in and do some more detail here later. I got a Steve image that I have in my mind. And I think the theme that I'm, seeing here is this whole drop out, drop in thing is you have to sort of get out to get back in. So maybe the reflection will be something along those lines. I'll sort of make those thoughts. And that's the advantage you have is you don't have to capture everything in the moment. You can come back, reflect, and put your own personal spin on what it is that you're hearing. So I think now we're going to step into point number 2. And Grant or Paddy, when we get close to break time, you just let me know. We'll put a pause on and we'll just keep going just like we're doing. I think we'll just stop whenever it feels like the natural right time to move.
Yeah.
So, okay. Now we're going to go to 2. I'm going to bring this back up here so I get ready for the next one. Here we go.
My second story is about love and loss. I was lucky. I found what I loved to do early in life. Woz and I started Apple in my parents' garage when I was 20. We worked hard, and in 10 years, Apple had grown from just the 2 of us in a garage into a $2 billion company with over 4,000 employees. We just released our finest creation, the Macintosh, a year earlier, and I just turned 30. And then I got fired. How can you get fired from a company you started? Well, as Apple grew, we hired someone who I thought was very talented to run the company with me. And for the first year or so, things went well. But then our visions of the future began to diverge, and eventually we had a falling out. When we did, our board of directors sided with him. And so at 30, I was out, and very publicly out. What had been the focus of my entire adult life was gone, and it was devastating. I really didn't know what to do for a few months. I felt that I had let the previous generation of entrepreneurs down, that I had dropped the baton as it was being passed to me. I met with David Packard and Bob Noyce and tried to apologize for screwing up so badly. I was a very public failure, and I even thought about running away from the Valley.
I'm going to stop right there. So he talks a little bit about, so he's got his second one is love and loss. I'll finish that while I'm here. So I imagine these guys in their garage, Woz and Steve in their garage working on this thing. And then he gets fired, he gets fired. So there's this machine that they're working on together. I really love that. For whatever reason, it caught in my mind is how can you get fired from the company you created? So I might put that in there. I might put some emphasis again on the fired. I haven't been using much script, so I'll bring it in here. Notice I moved the over a little bit because I know I've got to put company in here. So I'm kind of planning ahead a little bit. I'll do you as script. And I think I'll simplify his language. I'm interpreting this, so. I think this is a pretty big turning point in this story. So he talks about there's this garage scene and, then they turns into a very valuable company and then he gets fired. Like it's almost like this seems like the point of shift for him. So let's keep on going.
But something slowly began to dawn on me. I still loved what I did. The turn of events at Apple had not changed that one bit. I'd been rejected, but I was still in love. And so I decided to start over. I didn't see it then, but it turned out that getting fired from Apple was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. The heaviness of being successful was replaced by the lightness of being a beginner again, less sure about everything. It freed me to enter one of the most creative periods of my life. During the next 5 years, I started a company named Next, another company named Pixar, and fell in love with an amazing woman who would become my wife. Pixar went on to create the world's first computer animated feature film, Toy Story, and is now the most successful animation studio in the world. In a remarkable turn of events, Apple bought Next, and I returned to Apple, and the technology we developed at Next is at the heart of Apple's current renaissance. And Lorene and I have a wonderful family together.
All right, so I'm going to show you something here. I don't exactly know Pixar's logo or anything like that, so what I've done in the moment here is simply put their name inside of a box. I think I'll do the same thing for Next as well. And he happened to mention his wife's name was Laureen. I'll take her out of a box. Almost like he's scratching it on a tree or something like that. So these are just really simple. I really like this idea of he still loved what he did, even though he felt like a failure. And then the other thing that I thought of, I didn't do it, was what if there was a statement here, best thing ever. So that would be, again, the kind of thing I would have an idea for, identify a place where I could put it, and then come back, and I would do this probably after. So any of these things where I'm pausing and doing them. And then there's opportunities for highlighting and other things to make this even more interesting. So I have to think a little bit about, the other thing I imagine is maybe I could draw like Woody right here. So I've got enough space to draw Woody. So that might be a comeback. And next was this little cube-like computer. So maybe I could draw that there, but I won't do that now. All right. So in the second one, he talks a lot about love and loss, being fired, sort of what he's doing. So let's get back into it.
I'm pretty sure none of this would have happened if I hadn't been fired from Apple. It was awful tasting medicine, but I guess the patient needed it. Sometimes life's going to hit you in the head with a brick. Don't lose faith. I'm convinced that the only thing that kept me going was that I loved what I did. You've got to find what you love. And that is as true for work as it is for your lovers. Your work is going to fill a large part of your life. And the only way to be truly satisfied is to do what you believe is great work. And the only way to do great work is to love what you do. If you haven't found it yet, keep looking and don't settle. As with all matters of the heart, you'll know when you find it. And like any great relationship, it just gets better and better as the years roll on. So keep looking, don't settle.
So I'll pause there for a little bit. I think what I would do is coming back here, you'll see a couple things that I've done. So I've drawn a medicine bottle and a brick. My thought was, and I didn't do it in the moment, was to like put a little string on the brick, and maybe the little tag would say, you know, maybe it would say something like life. Barely fit that in there. When you see that. I don't know. I have to think about what I would do for medicine, probably RX, like so, right? So these two images sort of came like bad medicine, or, awful tasting medicine, and life hitting you with brick. And I'm thinking about highlighting here. So the key things I saw here were find what you love, do great work, and don't settle. I didn't finish that. And I think my gut says this should be bolded. So I'm going to come back in with that pause, and I'll do an emphasis on this word. So you can see that really pops out. All right. So we are at point 3. So I know there's a 3 coming. So the question here is, how much space do I leave for the end of the book? You can't see the whole book at the same time, but I'm roughly about halfway down the page. So I would probably leave just a little margin, kind of guesstimate about here, and then put my 3. I don't want to make it too low because I might have some reflections at the end I want to add to what Steve says. So to give you a sense of where we're going to go with the sketchnote, we'll go through 3 a lot like we did 1 and 2. And then we'll come back and finish all these up. I'll draw Steve. I'll draw some things, think about what he said, and sort of fill it in to do the complete work. So I'll slide this up a little bit so we can see the bottom, and I'll continue with the audio. Here we go.
My third story is about death. When I was 17, I read a quote that went something like, "If you live each day as if it was your last, someday you'll most certainly be right." It made an impression on me, and since then, for the past 33 years, I've looked in the mirror every morning and asked myself, if today were the last day of my life, would I want to do what I am about to do today? And whenever the answer has been no for too many days in a row, I know I need to change something. Remembering that I'll be dead soon is the most important tool I've ever encountered to help me make the big choices in life. Because almost everything, all external expectations, all pride, all fear of embarrassment or failure, these things just fall away in the face of death, leaving only what is truly important. Remembering that you are going to die is the best way I know to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose.
So I'm going to stop there because that was a lot of information. You can see how it can be challenging in the moment to do this live. Probably what I would be doing here was stopping here and leaving some space to think about that. But I really like this statement. I have little Steve on here. Remembering I'll be dead soon helps me. I think it was something along the lines of make the important decisions in life. So I've got a little space here. I've got something I can place. I've got this style where I'm doing imagery after the title. So I'll probably think of what can I do here, maybe based on something I hear, or maybe I'll leave it alone. We've been playing around with a little bit. So let's keep going.
You are already naked. There is no reason not to follow your heart. About a year ago, I was diagnosed with cancer. I had a scan at 7:30 in the morning, and it clearly showed a tumor on my pancreas. I didn't even know what a pancreas was. The doctors told me this was almost certainly a type of cancer that is incurable, and that I should expect to live no longer than 3 to 6 months. My doctor advised me to go home and get my affairs in order, which is doctor's code for prepare to die. It means to try and tell your kids everything. You thought you'd have the next 10 years to tell them in just a few months. It means to make sure everything is buttoned up so that it will be as easy as possible for your family. It means to say your goodbyes. I lived with that diagnosis all day. Later that evening, I had a biopsy where they stuck an endoscope down my throat, through my stomach and into my intestines, put a needle into my pancreas and got a few cells from the tumor. I was sedated, but my wife, who was there, told me that when they viewed the cells under a microscope, the doctors started crying because it turned out to be a very rare form of pancreatic cancer that is curable with surgery. I had the surgery, and thankfully, I'm fine now.
So as we know, Steve lasted a little bit longer than this, about 6 years, and passed away in 2011. So really interesting his focus here on death. So you notice that I'm doing a little bit more writing on this one and less imagery. And I think what I may be doing is wrapping things so that what struck me are the words being said. I think that's why I'm shifting back. So say your goodbyes is almost like I would put this as a statement that the doctor's saying, so it's in almost like a cartoon bubble. And I think what I might actually do is draw a little head here saying it. But I would make it, I may even come back in and make this dark. In fact, I'm thinking just to make it a silhouette. It's the representation of a doctor speaking those words to the patient. I'm right into the gutter here. So I might play with this a little bit after. Okay. So I really, the other thing that struck me was you're already naked, follow your heart. So he's sort of saying, death is sort of it's going to happen whether we like it or not. I almost like this as another one of these. Maybe this person is off page. So you've got a little bit of this going on. I've got an interesting space here to deal with. You notice that I've drawn my little Steve thing. I'll probably hit this with gray to make it a gravestone. So let's keep going. Let's see what else Steve has to say about death. Notice also I have not finished the death word. So that's another comeback. I put the placeholder in and come back to it.
This was the closest I've been to facing death, and I hope it's the closest I get for a few more decades. Having lived through it, I can now say this to you with a bit more certainty than when death was a useful but purely intellectual concept. No one wants to die. Even people who want to go to heaven don't want to die to get there. And yet, death is the destination we all share. No one has ever escaped it. And that is as it should be, because death is very likely the single best invention of life. It's life's change agent. It clears out the old to make way for the new. Right now, the new is you. But someday, not too long from now, you will gradually become the old and be cleared away. Sorry to be so dramatic, but it's quite true. Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life. Don't be trapped by dogma, which is living with the results of other people's thinking. Don't let the noise of others' opinions drown out your own inner voice. And most important, have the courage to follow your heart and intuition. They somehow already know what you truly want to become. Everything else is secondary.
I want to pause for just a second. It's really interesting, having heard this so many times, to hear it again. Again, I hear something different here in the way he's saying it. So you notice that I stopped here and switched to this one. I think this one might become dark, just for emphasis. So I'm saying, say everybody, no one escapes it. And I'm using sort of I don't use this lettering super often, but it's sort of the bubble lettering, maybe used in junior high school or something like that. But it felt right in the moment. A lot of times what I'm doing is I'm feeling what feels right in the moment, and I kind of go with it. Sometimes it puts me in jams. Like if I look back and see what I did, like, oh, I wish I would have made this, written this a little bit over more, and like there's imperfections here, but there's ways to work with that and to use that to your advantage. So let's come back to it. No one escapes it. Maybe I would say my interpretation is death always wins. Right, sort of a comment. And I'll think about how I'm going to work this space still. But I think coming back to this idea of not wasting your life was really the message. And to follow your heart here. I think I want to stack it. I thought about going here, so your life would be a tight fit here. And I also want to do, there's something there's an odd space here I need to deal with. So it would be better for me not to go this way and actually come back here and spell out what he's saying. Don't waste. And it still leaves me space down here as well. And once I do this lettering, I'll go back to the audio and we'll listen to it again. So you can see why I teach the two-line method. This takes lots of practice and precision. And even in some cases, I'm not doing it perfectly, which is why I think I'll come back and maybe bold this or do something with it. Maybe the background will be black. Something you'll notice that when I do this, I try to leave some flexibility to change things and add things. So I've got somewhere to go at the end. Sometimes you can't, but that's sort of the way I approach it. All right, so let's finish up the audio. I only have like 1:45 left. Then we'll wrap up the whole sketch note. I'll tie some things together. I'll show you the color and the shading, talk through my thinking, and then we'll be at the Q&A session. So I think we pretty well captured some of the highlights, which is really the intention of Sketchnotes, is to capture those meaningful highlights. And if I did this tomorrow, it probably would look different. And I think that's a good thing because that means you're really focusing. So here we go.
When I was young, there was an amazing publication called the Whole Earth Catalog, which was one of the Bibles of my generation. It was created by a fellow named Stuart Brand, not far from here in Menlo Park, and he brought it to life with his poetic touch. This was in the late 60s, before personal computers and desktop publishing, so it was all made with typewriters, scissors, and Polaroid cameras. It was sort of like Google in paperback form 35 years before Google came along. It was idealistic, overflowing with neat tools and great notions. Stuart and his team put out several issues of the Whole Earth Catalog, and then, when it had run its course, they put out a final issue. It was the mid-1970s, and I was your age. On the back cover of their final issue was a photograph of an early morning country road, the kind you might find yourself hitchhiking on if you were so adventurous. Beneath it were the words, "Stay hungry, stay foolish." It was their farewell message as they signed off. Stay hungry, stay foolish. And I have always wished that for myself. And now, as you graduate to begin anew, I wish that for you. Stay hungry, stay foolish. Thank you all very much.
All right. So you see, I've already made a mistake if you want to be strict about it. He said the wording was underneath the picture of the country road. So I've already made a mistake, but if no one's listening to the talk, who cares? The message is this country road, which I'll embellish, and then the words, stay hungry, stay foolish. I was thinking of a variety of ways I could represent this. I thought about drawing typewriters and Polaroids, but I felt like he was leading to this final image, right? So I decided here to do this. I'll do this in script. Just kind of feels like a good script thing to do. Dot my I. All right. So here we're at the end. Maybe what I can do is raise the camera just a little bit so that I can get the whole thing in there for you. More or less. And you can see how that feels. It looks like, so let's just reflect on it. I've got a lot of dead space here. I've got some space here that I've actually could turn into a shape or a shadow or something if I wish to. If I look, this is relatively full, and then this is a bit tighter. So I feel like maybe what I have to do is, if I look at these two here, I can fill in some space here. Like I would try to make the density of this one feel kind of like these. They're probably not going to be equal. Already the content of these, they're probably equal by the time I draw Steve here. And then I have to decide what I want to do with this space. Do I want to extend one? Do I want to put something else here? So that's what I'll be doing now. So the next thing I'll do is fill in everything with black. Once I feel satisfied with that, then we'll come back in and I'll do the gray and the teal. So this is the kind of thing that I would be doing after the sketch note. So I mean, most of, you can see how in many cases, most of it's here, but there's little bits that I add in, there's embellishments that are happening because it's just like, there's so often so much information. I mean, the challenge with the Steve Jobs commencement address is it's so well written and so compact and so tight, and there's so much images, like there's almost too much to choose from that you just have to pick something, right? So there was like, in each one of these, there's more imagery I could have chosen, and I chose to do these things for the reasons that they just struck me in that moment. All right. So I think what I'll do is I'll zoom back down in a little bit, and we'll focus on the first one. So let's kind of talk through this one. What can we do here? Well, it's interesting because I've got drop out twice and drop in. He sort of started with this. So I think what I'm going to do is work on mom. Mom is bugging me. She's got really strange hands here. I don't know what to do about that. Maybe I just proportionize her body a little bit more to fit that. I'm not sure. I have no idea what she looked like either. And this would have been like the 70s, so I could, do something with her. So if I remember right, if you come back here, I was doing this Berlin style with the bold. Maybe that can actually help me. So let's say if I do the Berlin style where we have a bold line around this, let's see if I can use that to my advantage. And what I'll say is, like, by drawing on the inside of the line, it makes it feel like the object is smaller. So maybe I can pull that off. Maybe I can't. I don't know. We have to allow for the fact that some things just don't always work like we want, and to be okay with that. Really, the message is here, right? That's, it might actually be funny to think about, wow, his mom sure had big hands or something like that, right? So we've got the little bit of that Berlin bold outside edge going on. I'm going to fill in her skirt a little bit more, make that solid. Make her foot a little bit bigger. So now what I want to do is, I think I'll put the bold line on the baby. So I think what part of what I do sometimes, just working this will give me other ideas. Sometimes just moving. I guess the baby doesn't really have hands. That's a little bit weird, but maybe funny. I'll emphasize this word since it's right next to the baby. So it's interesting about the mother saying that he'll go to college. It's sort of this almost a desperate move to keep Steve, like they'd committed to him, right? They really wanted this baby, and that probably was meaningful to Steve to have, an adoptive mom that really wanted him. So I'm going to come back here and the first dropout, I'll do the same Berlin style thick line on there. I think the interesting thing about that thick line and thickening these things up is it puts more emphasis. Like if I didn't have another color, it would be enough to give it the depth and the weight that would sort of draw. It's drawing your eye. See how it's drawing your eye a little bit? So now what I'll do is I'll come back in. I want these little chevron arrow things. Don't like that quote, but did the best I could. And I did bold up as well. Just looking for places where we can smooth out those letters. So I see a problem here. I made a mistake, and I almost looks like Andy. So there's a goof. If I had whiteout, maybe I would fix that and move it over, but I don't. And it's technically quotes, so I should really add the quote marks in there. So that's something like this kind of mistake. If I was doing this for commission. If I wasn't, I might do it on the iPad. You just move it over. Or if I did it on paper, I would just modify that in Photoshop or a tool like it where you can make those changes. So that's the good news if you're doing it for some production reason that's going to be shared or something. This is your opportunity to look for those errors and identify them and then deal with them in the production workflow. So this too is a quote. Dropped out. So this would be what I would call the working at stage, where I've got the guts of the message that I want. And now I'm starting to work it. I'm imagining Steve is like this hippie guy. I'm trying to imagine what Steve as a hippie would look like. Maybe like his mom, maybe his hands are up. I think his hands would be about there. And I'm imagining him with some kind of like a robe or something. Almost like Steve Jobs as Jesus or something. Let's say he's got like his little tie thing here. So another thing too is by doing this, I don't have to draw most of Steve's body. So that could be a trick if you feel uncomfortable drawing people and their bodies, is to do something like this where you hide them behind things. I know other friends have talked about that. I think what I might do is like I have this image of Steve with his foot up here. And I think these would be like sandals. So let's turn those into sandals. Let's see if I can do that. All right. So now I'll come in and do my Berlin style on Steve. So we're following our theme. This is where this 1.0 marker comes in really handy. And as I understand with the Berlin style, according to Ben and Nadine, is the lines on the inside still stay thin. It's just sort of an outline of the overall shape. It's sort of there, the way they described it. So hopefully I'm following that. Ben and Nadine, if you're watching this, you'll have to let me know if I represented your style in Berlin well. So what might be funny is I'm thinking about what he said was he had a Coke bottle. So what if he had a Coke bottle in his hand here? So back in that time in the U.S., you could get glass Coke bottles and return them for money. So I think that's what he was referring to. All right. I think I'm going to make his beard a little more curly. I'm spending a little more on Steve, but he is sort of the focus of this whole thing. I almost want to do like Joseph's Technicolor Dreamcoat, but I don't think that would be a good idea. Okay, so you can see, look how, now compare like this to this, how much stronger this is. That also then tells me that this needs to be bolded as well. So let's come back up here, we'll circle back around, and then we'll finish this section up. Any reports out there on the quality of streamings now that we unshared and reshared with that smaller screen size? Does it seem like it's improved? Anybody have any feedback on that?
Yeah, I think it's still a bit choppy, Mike.
Is it? Okay.
But don't worry.
Got it.
We followed it really well. So yeah.
I'm not moving super duper fast, so it's hopefully not too noticeable. I'm trying to be very intentional about marking. All right, so we're getting close to finishing this title. I think what I might do is extend this a little bit. Maybe I'll put some color on there. Bold it up a little bit more. It's a little bit of a risk because if it goes wrong, then sometimes you can, it's always a risk when you start to play with stuff. that you could make it worse than it was. But sometimes it really pays off. So I guess I'm a risk taker in this stuff sometimes. All right, so now let's go around. Let's do our Macintosh, our old school Macintosh. And then I think when we come back in and do some of the highlighting, you'll really see. So there's my calligraphy. It would be funny to do like an old floppy disk here, laying on the table. I heard a joke. There was someone who had an old floppy disk and showed it to a young kid. And the young kid, oh, cool, you made a physical version of the save icon. Because kids don't relate to floppy disks because they never use them. So it's kind of interesting. Okay, and then here's our last part. Emphasizing these guys, making them a little bit. And then we'll think about how can I really wrap this up? Are there any missing pieces? I would say the good thing about this is like if you've seen a finished sketch note, you just assume that, you know, someone is sitting there like doing this amazing illustration in the moment. No, it's usually not how the way it works. Now, some people can do a lot in the time, but even the great ones still need a little bit of noodling time at the end to perfect. So that's encouraging for you if you had this idea to do everything in the moment and perfectly. That's not the truth. All right, so I feel like this is bolded up nicely. Now let's just compare it to the other side. You can see how that feels already. Now we're putting a little more time in here. You wouldn't have to. You could keep it that way. That's just a choice because I know when we come in and start adding color, it's going to help. It's going to help with that. So what are some of the things that I might add to this that would be funny or carry some image? Thinking back to connecting the dots, it's this idea that you can't do it looking forward. You can only do it looking backward. That is a message I remember that I might work in here. And I have to think about where I would put it. I think I like this space right here because it would fill this in. And I would paraphrase it. I would use script to start with at least. Maybe only will be bold lettering. Go back to script for the connect. I think script again for the dots. You see what I'm estimating is like how much space do I have to work with? As much as I can before I commit to this, putting the ink down. Because once that ink is down, it's got to be plural. I think I'll stay with looking as script. And I think I want to separate the word backward. I don't know if I want to do backward as to stacked, or I could make it condensed. And I think of Back to the Future, sort of this tilted backward thing. So maybe that's really interesting. What if you use Back to the Future lettering? It sort of tilts backward, right? I'll put a little dash in there. And those should stack relatively nicely on top of each other. They're both 4-letter words. That A, I think I matched the W. So it's not totally perfect, but it gets that feeling. The W needs to be a little bit taller here so that it lines up properly. Exclamation point. And then the last message that I remember from him saying around all this was dropping out and dropping in helped him do the things he was passionate about. So I got to think about how I would do that. Here, I'll go with condensed type. I would almost say it freed me. Maybe I'll put it in his terms, freed Steve. To discover. I almost call it new interests. Talks a little bit about the calligraphy.
See, I'm watching you do that, Mike, and I'm almost wanting you to connect that back to the MacBook up there. Yeah.
You're thinking exactly where I was going. It's really good. I was trying to think what would be the best way to do it. I like the idea of using the same kind of
that's cool
thing here, right?
Yeah.
Good call. Grant, you're on it, man.
See, I'm learning from the master, you see. Starting to think like you.
We'll give it our Berlin style. Make it a little heavier. It'll be fun to see what we want to do with color at the end. I'm just kind of leaving it open. And you'll see that I do this sometimes, like I'll do little dashes. And it makes it look like it's fading in. Right? So here, dropping out freed Steve to discover new interest. And then I'll think like, do I want to have any kind of wrap up, or do I just like it open here? The other space that I see that I've got some space to think about here is I could use some kind of a separator or something. That's kind of where I'm heading here, and I can deal with that in the next round. Can only connect the dots looking backward, dropping out, help free Steve. I kind of want to do one more thing here.
Mike, we got about 7 minutes until we're hitting the Q&A point.
Gotcha. Thank you. So there, I'll add that last little tidbit. So let's work our way quickly through. I'm going to leave this alone. I'm going to leave this. Something I'll tell you is I kind of like white space, like leaving this space like this. It sort of rests you and it pushes you toward the thing that you did. So the temptation might be to, let's fill this in right to the bottom. But maybe this ends up being a line or something like that, right? Like something to finish it. But right now, let's leave it. And with our last 7 minutes, we'll do the same thing here. So you can see these are pretty simple, drawings of Steve, and Waz is a big guy, so I made him a little bit bigger in their garage, right? I want to make sure I leave time that we can get to the color. I think fired, I'll give a little bit of thickness to the edges, just like the others. I think this might be a candidate for either gray or green inside of it. And I want it to be, notice that I'm keeping it real loose, like the other ones I was really careful. I'm almost making this stressful by making it, see how it's jiggly a little bit? So you can also do that with your line. Because it was probably not a really good experience for Steve, or nor anyone who gets fired. I noticed that the question mark is a little far from the asterisk or the exclamation point. So I've put a little bit of thickness there. Maybe I'll put a little suggestion that this is a house. I think I'll do some gray in here when I come back. Getting fired is best thing ever. I think I was thinking about putting a shape around these numbers. I have to think about what I'll do for that. I may not. He still loves what he does. So I think I'll just make sure that this is all even and bold because I was doing this quick. So I'm just really looking for spots to fill. This heart could be a little bit cleaner if I want that heart to pop. Just looking for little places to fill in. Clean things up a little bit. I have to think about what I'm going to do with these yet too. So that'll be my next challenge. So then we have this decision about Pixar, Next, and Loreen. I think I'll bold these up a little bit, just like we're doing for the rest. I've decided that I'm going to do like a little computer for this. And then for this one, maybe it's Buzz Lightyear. He sort of has that pose, right? But it's really sketchy. So you just have the suggestion of what it is. And then, of course, Loreen. I'll make sure that her letters are just a little bit bolder so they feel like they're connected. Okay. So what do I do with these guys? I think I'm going to do a shade here, but I need to darken the edges if I'm following my Berlin style. Let's do that quickly. The brick from life. That also is going to be shaded. So I have to make sure that it looks like a brick. So I'll put some speckles. Maybe there's little tidbits falling off of it, right? We'll do the shadow on this one. Detail on the thing there. And I think I'm gonna make it liquid. I think this is pretty good. I'm gonna leave this alone. Find what you love, do great work, and don't settle. I've got some space here I can work with, but I think right now I'm gonna leave it. White space, the white space. Probably the last thing I'll do is, if I'm following style, this should be bolder. That's pretty good. And maybe the gray here could circle this or something. I'll have to think about that next. Okay, we're on our last section already. So 3 is pretty good. I think I'm going to emphasize death since I was near the end. You can see I was just putting my 2-line outlines, knowing that I would come back.
About 3 minutes, Mike.
3 minutes? Gotcha. Thank you. Maybe this one is just an exclamation point, right? Or a skull. A simple skull. We'll come in and do our Steve-O. And I think we could probably steal a minute or two from our Q&A if we wanted to for the coloring. So there, I made that a little bit bolder than I wanted. I sort of crossed over into the text. Sorry about that. Sometimes these curves can be tricky. Do the same here. Thanks for keeping me on track, Grant. It's good to know the time. Time is escaping me when I get into this. I just sort of get into it, so suddenly time will be elapsed. I'll emphasize goodbyes. I think this is okay. No one escapes it. Death always wins. This might be a shape I can do later. I'll do my Berlin style on the cover, the back cover, technically. That's sort of our final place that we end up. What I tried to do here were pages in the magazine. So it looked like the that was fanning this way to suggest it was the back. All right. Don't waste your life. I want to do some emphasis. I think this is going to be green. I've got it's open enough that I can do green. And I think we're right at time, or pretty close, thereabouts.
Yeah.
So the last thing I'll do is take a minute and we'll do my gray and my green. So I'm going to steal a little bit of Q&A time just so I can finish this up for you guys. All right, so let's go back to 1. Where would I put tonality? Well, I think I would put tonality around the little Mac here. Just a little shadow. Maybe I'll put some shadowing on Steve's mom and the baby. Maybe the baby's open and it's just shadow next to the baby. A little bit of touch. And I would do these in this order, like I would do the gray first, come back and do the others. So the last thing I'll do is green. A little shadow inside there. And then I would actually do like strokes like this. And then I think I would have a little shadow of Steve himself. Like that.
It's amazing what difference that.
Isn't that amazing what that gray does?
Yeah.
It is. It really is. So here's a little trick. So rather than filling this with gray, I would actually go outside of it. And what it does is by putting that subtle gray on the outside, that arrow suddenly pops.
Yeah, exactly.
That's how that thing pops. So that's really cool. And you'll see that, around here, I'll put a little bit more. I think to be fair, I'll do a little shadow under Steve's mom. So that just pops things up a little bit. All right, so I think we're good there. Let's do our gray here. So remember I said I wanted to suggest the garage should be really in the dark or something like that.
Mike, while you're doing that, we've got a question. It's actually from
yeah, go ahead. I can just work while you're doing that.
When you would put shadow inside versus outside.
Yeah.
That was from me, Mike. I was selfishly wanting to know.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I'm sort of making decisions on the fly. Like on here, I'm putting some shadow inside the garage because I want some depth here. On this one, back here when I did this outside, I knew I wanted the arrow to pop. So when you saw this, it would bring it back. So that's where it really depends on, and I think you have to just play with it. Like there's no, like I can give you rules, but I don't know that they would always apply. So you notice that on the fired, I sort of made it really loose and then made it gray inside because I wanted this to be emphasized a little bit. You'll notice that I'm going to come in here and put a little shadow underneath this. I think this is going to be my style for the quote boxes. So while I'm at it, I can do the one down below here and the one over here too. Sometimes I do that so I don't forget like where I did it. Like I'm choosing it to be on the left side. Like what I might do is get so into this and come down here and put it on the other side. And then it would be a little bit inconsistent. Okay. So I think the medicine is going to be green and I'm going to do the brick gray. And I want this edge here to be a little darker. So I'll hit it again. I'll probably come back to it. But then I want to have, so here's an example where, I'm doing something on the outside and the inside. All I'm doing is trying to draw emphasis to this little shape, almost like a cloud or something. And then I'll come back in and you'll see that when I hit it again, it gets a little darker and it gives it just a little bit of depth. Maybe for these, I would do just something underneath them. They don't need much more. If I go inside there, it's hard to read the text. So maybe I'll hit these guys with a little gray. So I think that's pretty good for the number 2. Let's go to number 3 now. And if you want to start queuing up questions, I could probably be doing this while I'm answering questions.
Yeah, let's fire some questions at you then.
Yeah.
While you're doing it. We had one from Suzanne who asked, you've done a lot of kind of double lining through there, and I guess that's taken time. Why not just go with a thicker pen?
That is a good option, and I do have that. I do carry like the Neuland fine one, can be helpful for that. Sometimes though, I want to go so minimal that I actually will only take, I'll only take a few pens. So this provides that option if I'm in a place where I only have a couple pens, but that's certainly an option. And I would almost call that more of a style choice about what you want to bring with you. but it certainly can be done. I kind of like, so that the other thing is, if you, once you start getting like 5 or 6 pens, then you're like tracking pens, and it's another overhead that you have to manage, right? So that would be sort of the reason why. And I didn't have the fancy bold pens initially, and when I used Sharpies and not Neuland markers, which don't bleed, they would bleed to the back page. So there were other problems that probably encouraged me away from that. That just sort of built a style around what I had available. And now that I have the option of all kinds of other things, I just don't need them now. But that certainly doesn't mean that I don't use them on occasion, or that you shouldn't use them. It's just a choice. So here's a choice where I've put the gray on the no one escapes it. Death always wins. And I think the final thing, now I'm going to come back in and do my green. So I think I can get away with green in here. I don't know if it's going to be too strong, but let's see. It's going to change the dynamic of the Sketchnote a lot. Again, this you can do while you're watching TV. So if you just did the Sketchnote and did all your tweaking at home, like if there wasn't a rush to do it, like the organizer's waiting for you to finish, that's one thing. Of course, now so much of this work is online, right? You could probably do it live, or you could even request access to the video or get the video and use the video. So it's interesting. Look how this green pops this message, right? So I would say what my guess was right was I want to use the green last and sparingly, because it really can shift the focus, just like a black. It's almost got the depth of a black. So what do we have for another question? Well, I can do this sort of mindlessly while I'm listening.
There's a couple of questions that were kind of related. Ruth asked something early on about being in a live event and how do you remember what words to go back to? And I think we had a similar question from Nicole saying, while sketching, I have difficulty to concentrate on what's being said. Were you always able to listen and sketch, or did that evolve? I probably couldn't remember enough to fill it in later, and I'm too slow. And I think somebody else echoed that. So there's a bit of a theme about how do you kind of listen and even remember what to go back to. I think I share that one a little bit.
Yeah, with that much information, for sure. That's a good question. I think I've over time I've gotten better at it, and I can do it. In this case, we're sort of deconstructing, so it's a little different thing. I had thought about when I got done, like doing it again and seeing what came out of it. We don't have time for that. But I think it is a built skill, but there are also other tricks. So remember this little thing that I showed you before where we did layouts. You could also flip it over and like, oh, they're saying so you just write it like, who cares what it looks like? And then you have it off on the side, and you like, maybe it would be one, I want these things, and you can make them as ugly as you want.
Yeah.
I wouldn't call that cheating. I would call that being smart.
I do that all the time. We had the Q&A the other day on Instagram Live, and I mentioned I'll stick that on a little post-it and put it in the space where I know I want to capture it, but I haven't got time, or I'm lacking inspiration in the moment. So I just scribble enough to remember.
Sometimes you can do it in place. Like you notice that sometimes I would not finish a title and leave it alone. So it can be sometimes done, but sometimes you want a little more backup than that. And that's where you would go to using, maybe a little card or sticky notes or something. You can jot things down and have, not like if you're like, oh, I want to keep the layout good here, you can be as ugly as you want here and then transfer it over. Some people I've heard too, I think you were saying this, Grant, was having little tiny sticky notes and sticking it in with writing a little note.
Yeah.
So when you came back, oh, that's right, I wanted to write about that. And you would come back, peel the note off, stick it here, and then fill it in the way that you thought made sense to what you were thinking.
Yeah, I kind of do that for two reasons: to remember the stuff, and also it forces me to leave some space around it, so I can kind of mark out a section that I know I want to come back to, but leave enough space for it. Yeah. We've also got a question, Mike, about I guess what you're doing now, going back and tidying this up. How much time do you typically dedicate to cleaning up your sketch notes afterwards? I guess it's an it depends answer, but
yeah, it's typically around 15 minutes, maybe. I don't know, 15, 20 minutes. I'll just get a nice coffee or something or a snack, So the trick about it is to not make it into a burden, but to make it into the fun part. Like, oh, this is the part where it's all coming together and I can make things, just the way I want them and I have control over things.
Yeah.
I think it's important to think of it that way.
I mean, I've just loved watching this last section now, seeing how the
different
raw
it is. Yeah.
The raw output has all of a sudden just been brought to life with the shadow and double lining and the Berlin outline and all those. I mean, just looking at this now that you've zoomed out, I can't believe from where you started and where you kind of left each section that it kind of looks this clean.
The devil is in the details. So here's my challenge. Maybe this could be a question to the audience. Where should I put the green in this one? So we've got some highlights here. We've got a little bit of highlight here. We've got sort of the header, and I might come back and then fill this in more. Like maybe I want that solid now. I'd have to decide about that because I'm sort of going with this fill style and not this line style after all. Where, like, I would be really curious to hear who's on the call. Where do you think we can place green here that wouldn't, like, it's a little bit challenging. Like, where do you place that? I have a couple of ideas, but I want to hear what people say. Maybe I'll call out you and Paddy, and you can tell me what you think.
Well, people are suggesting in the chat, Mike. So Ruth said the jumper, or Lisa said the mum's dress, maybe a polka dot on the mum's shirt.
That's a great. I love it. I didn't think of that one.
Yeah, it's good
because it's the 70s, right? I was thinking about, like, flowers or something. Maybe the dots should actually be bigger. That's a great idea.
The people are suggesting outside the Mac, coloring the drop out, the gravestone grass, baby's pants. Drop in, maybe make that more important because we want to emphasize that.
How about this? We give her striped legs. It's right out of the 70s. Maybe.
Cool.
Isn't it amazing though? Like, all we're doing is like the tiniest little details, but those details make the difference. It's amazing.
Yeah.
So another place I thought is if I wanted to spend a little more time, like I did here, I could put a green. So if the focus is on Steve, like I could put some kind of cloud behind him and fill it in and make it so your eye would tend to go to Steve, right? Like, where do we want to go to? We've got a lot of emphasis over here. I thought about doing the max screen, but the green is too dark.
Yeah.
If I did that, I would fill it in and then hit this with white. I don't have a white with me. But like if I had a white at home, maybe that would be a way to solve it because the screen was sort of a green color.
Yeah.
All those suggestions are really great. I mean, you could make the little floppy green. Like, it's just little details, right? Maybe in fact that would be what I would do. Like I would do the floppy green. It also reinforces where the arrow, that heaviness, is coming back here. So a lot of this is just like feel and style and opinion. Like there is no right or wrong answer. There might be, you could make the little baby's diaper teal. I don't know. That might be a little weird, but I think what I would do is probably I could stop right there, but I feel like there's one other place I want to go. I love this idea of the polka dots, and then that led me to the stripes. It was really awesome. And I think I'm going to come back in here and just do a little something like this. It doesn't have to be much. All it's doing is drawing your eye to the color and balancing out the imagery. And then, if we like this, we can go further if we wanted to, but something like that.
Yeah, that's good.
Maybe there's a little. So basically it's encircling him or something, I don't know. This could go all kinds of ways. Then that tells me that, okay, if we're doing that, then I would come back in here and finish this as solid. It feels like it would be better suited as a solid. Maybe it's a crosshatch to give it more depth.
So we're nearly out of time, Mike. We had a question about the iPad app you mentioned.
Yeah. Was that the timer app you were asking about?
No,
just, or the drawing app.
What drawing app do you use on the iPad?
It's really interesting. I use Paper by WeTransfer a lot. I'm probably, like, with me and Mauro Toselli are like the only two people left using it, I think, sometimes. I know that's not true, but that's sort of what I think sometimes. So I use that still a lot because I just know it really well, and I think the tools are really intuitive. But I'm working on an illustration project, and I'm starting to use Procreate, and I'm starting to appreciate sort of the power. The challenge I have with Procreate is there is just so much to potentially do that it can be overwhelming.
Yeah.
So I would almost like, I wonder if there would be a way to like almost have a tutorial like for sketchnoters. Here's how to set up your Procreate so it's easier to use, and like here's the brushes, go download them, do this, do that, like have a whole flow, because it seems like it's like the Wild West for Procreate. It's awesome, but it's a little bit like drawing with a nuclear reactor. Like I could, adjust every little nuance. And the problem is I go to like look at a brush and I'm not really sure what in the world I'm doing sometimes. Like I'll just slide this and see what happens, but it's so deep. Like I don't know where to begin. And I think I've been looking at some training, and even the training is sort of all over the place. So there's not like one definitive training on Procreate. So it's fun, but it's also challenging. But I think that's an awesome app too. And the third one I would say to consider is an app called Concepts. And Concepts is interesting because all the drawing mechanism is not pixels. So most of these apps, when you draw on the screen, it's drawing in really fine pixels, little squares, right? Concepts is interesting because as you draw with your Apple Pencil, it's actually drawing a mathematical curve that then is represented as pixels on the screen, which means that you can zoom it up or zoom it down and it stays of the same quality.
Yeah.
The story I tell people around Concept was I did an illustration project for a client. They wanted a drawing to look like something, and they said they wanted pen. They wanted to look like an architectural drawing, something like that. So I did this whole illustration in pen, and then they came back and said, oh, it looks a little too final. Can you change that to pencil? And I was like, oh. But then I remembered Concepts uses vectors as the foundational element that draws all these shapes. So what I did is block by block, I selected it with a selection tool, and I switched the brush to pencil. And it worked. And I went through this whole illustration that probably took me, I don't know, half an hour, 45 minutes, maybe an hour. But can you imagine like redrawing that whole thing 3, 4, 5 hours with pencil? All I had to do was select the objects and switch the stylus that it was doing to pencil, and it was amazing. So there are some advantages if it's right for you, right? So again, it's always the question of, I'm a big believer in using the right tool for the job. So if it feels like that's the right tool and it achieves what you need, then use it. If Procreate is right for you, then use that. If that's too much overhead and you just want simple tools you don't have to think much about, then maybe Paper by WeTransfer is a better starting place. And you can use progression. So you can start with Paper, go to Procreate or Concepts, or use them, based on the thing that, what is the goal that I want to do? So that would be the way I would say that.
Okay, Mike, well, I think we're just about out of time. Just wanted one more question we asked, and it was about where to sign your work, or if you sign your work, which I've just noticed you've just started doing.
Isn't that funny?
Right on cue.
I wasn't planted. Yeah, so I'll find a place. Sometimes I'll put it here. Another place I might look is like over here. Usually it's on the second page, or if it's a single page, it's sort of lower bottom right or something like that, where I would put that. And the other question I could have made a decision is, should that have been green? That could have been an option too.
Yeah.
So, there's, I think that the beautiful thing about sketchnotes and the challenging thing is that they're open, right? They're open so you can interpret it the way you want, but that also means like, if you don't know where to start, you need someone to guide you. Where do I begin this thing, right? Because it could be anything. So you almost need to, I find it really helpful to put frameworks or constraints on yourself. Like you notice, I've only used 3, black, green, and gray. And that's all I've used, but it's quite a rich image that we've produced. Now I have an orange, a couple more pens, and I thought about using them, but I think the message for me is you don't really need much, right? You just need like store-bought pens, even store-bought pens, and that's all you need. And then make sure you sign it. I think it's important, unless the client, if you do it for clients and they don't want the signature, well, you can remove it. But I think this is really important. Whatever your signature looks like, this happens to be kind of like my Instagram and Twitter handle, whatever. So it works as a promotional thing. But I think it's important to sign and show that you did the work that you did.
Awesome stuff. Right, Mike, I think that's us at time. We've a few
Right
minutes
at time.
over. But that was awesome, Mike. I loved every minute of that.